You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today we're looking at another two teams in the NBA, looking at the dynasty prospects of a bunch of players on their teams. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. And we are going to start off talking about the Miami Heat. And for me to talk about the Miami Heat with one player, what I'm going to try and do for most of these, bring in the host of the corresponding Locked On podcast and talk to them about that player. They watch them every minute of all 82 games or however many have been played, 60 plus this season. I get a little bit of an inside view on those players. So let's start with the Miami Heat. So now, let's talk to the host of the Locked On Heat podcast. David Ramil is here with me. David, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what we're going to do in this Dynasty series, as I just mentioned to my listeners, is that we're going to talk to a host across the Locked On Podcast Network about one of the players on their team, and the Miami Heat player I chose to talk about. Now, I did put a poll out on Twitter, which player did you want me to go deeper in, and the majority said Bam Adebayo, but I think people already know how good he is. He's owned or rostered in every Dynasty league already. Tyler Herro is a little bit different because he had a ton of hype coming in out of Summer League. He's played a sizable role on this Miami Heat team, but from a fantasy point of view, he hasn't been great. He's the 182nd ranked player. He's still playing 27 minutes a night. So I want to get your impressions of not only Herro's rookie season, but what it means for him moving forward. Like, where can he push from here? So how impressed have you been with Herro this season as a rookie?
I think he's been really good, but I wouldn't say that he's exceeded my expectations, but he's also got some pretty obvious limitations, particularly on defense, where he's learning. I think the knock on him coming out of college was that, obviously we only saw a very limited sample size in his 1 year at Kentucky, but, obviously he didn't measure in the way a prototypical defensive player would be, as far as his wingspan and things of that sort. And so you weren't quite sure whether or not he'd be a high caliber defensive player. He's been a little better than expected, although he's a little out of position at times. And as far as the shooting is concerned, that's been phenomenal. I think, Erik Spoelstra has not always been one to play rookies a great deal of minutes, but Herro has earned that right because he's been coming off the bench and been playing, very well off the bench in that kind of offensive spark mode. And so he's been really valuable. In fact, he's missed a bunch of games recently due to a ankle injury. And it was kind of evident, especially in the fourth quarter stretches where Miami was giving up significant double-digit leads, that they needed somebody who was capable of getting his own shot from anywhere, and Herro certainly fits that bill. And so while his numbers don't necessarily look that particularly gaudy, his impact has been pretty great, especially in late-game situations where I think he's really kind of embraced that. Erik Spoelstra has mentioned that a number of times to media that for guys like Jimmy Butler and Adebayo and everybody else on that roster, you've got a guy like Herro who really lives for the moment in the fourth quarter, and he's put up some really big shots in that capacity.
It's interesting in that regard thinking about Herro because having someone who's going to create shots for themselves in those sort of situations can be valuable. Obviously, getting those shots up now, he's hitting the threes at a pretty strong rate. His overall true shooting isn't good. It's well below average, 53%, because the two-pointers are going in at a really small volume. Some of the advanced stuff isn't great either. He's got the worst luck-adjusted on-off numbers of the entire team outside of guys like KZ Okpala and Udonis Haslem, who have barely played. He's a negative 7.7 there. The worst out of every player on that roster. So that's a bit of a concern to me that the offense has struggled a lot with him on the court versus when he was off the court. Now, some of that, of course, is noisy as to who he's playing with, but there's a few things there, like lack of a really low steal rate, very small assist rate, the fact that those two-pointers aren't going in. He's not getting to the line a huge amount. So to me, he looks to me to be that sort of fantasy player that the hype will outstrip the production, almost similar to a way a guy like Jamal Crawford played, who will take those shots and make big ones and be not afraid, but the lack of contributions in those other areas, plus some of those defensive concerns, I think that might overall limit his upside. Do you think that I'm being unfair on him there? Because, again, having that ability to take those shots is important, and those other things can come. I'm just not sure that they're all going to come together for him.
Yeah, I have to agree with you 100%, to be honest with you. I mean, it's a pretty astute take on his impact. And it's funny because in Miami, he's almost virtually beloved by the
Yeah.
fan base. Like I've never seen anything like it where wherever he takes a shot, there's this electric kind of ooh building up in the crowd as he takes these shots. And they kind of there's like this deflation when he doesn't make them. Like there's the expectation that he's going to hit every shot, which of course he does not. But they just rally behind him so completely, and it's interesting to see that because overall he does have some weaknesses there. And I think you're right as far as his impact. It's going to be mostly just a guy who can get his shots off. He's very electric. He's got a great dribble, something that I did not expect. And he has some really nice moves there where he can pull back, has great control of the handle, and then is able to rise up and get a shot off over almost anyone because he is a little taller than expected too. He's thin and he's not particularly muscular, but he's comfortable and can absorb contact as well despite his overall weight. But there's not much else beyond his scoring abilities. And so I think if you're looking what he's going to be like in the future, obviously you'd want him to improve a little bit more as a perimeter defender. And then I think the next step is obviously to get better as a playmaker for others as well, because he can break down defenders so well with that handle, and you have to respect his ability to get that shot off. The next step then is finding cutters, guys moving off ball. And that's the issue too, is I think if you're looking at his plus minus numbers or his on off numbers, it's because there's a lot of ball watching. You're kind of seeing what he does because he kind of overhandles and then he pulls back and can get that shot off. But if the next step for him is kind of incorporating everybody else and finding a more balanced approach to offense.
He very much seems to me to be that player who a lot of the opinions on him are highlight based, and he's going to have a lot of highlights, and that is the key player that can be overvalued in long-term dynasty type fantasy basketball scenarios. And I compared him to Jamal Crawford. I went and have a look at Jamal Crawford's rankings. Like the best season he ever had was the 49th best player. Never was able to be better than that, and I think that would be an okay result from Herro. In those seasons that Crawford averaged 17 points, 2 threes, which probably equates to about 3 threes per game now. But Crawford also had 1.4 steals and 5 assists, and I'm not even sure that we could get that out of Herro. Now, he probably could be a better overall shooter because Crawford struggled to ever get over 42% in his career, but Herro hasn't done that in these 60 games, so he's still got room to improve there. But that's the concern I have. So I'm glad that my view from watching a smaller amount of Heat games than you have and looking at the numbers sort of ties in with what you've seen. So I think that's important to note. And again, a player that, and as you said, that hype from the Miami fan base, it does translate across the NBA into fantasy circles, and people have that inflated opinion. So, David, thank you for coming on and giving us the insider look at Tyler Herro and the first 60-odd games or 50-odd games of his NBA career.
Anytime. Glad to do it.
All right, so let's go on and talk about the rest of the Heat players now. They're going to talk about in today's show Kendrick Nunn, a guy that that I've been a little bit down on compared to others. He is 24 and a half years of age, and look, he's had a really strong rookie season for an undrafted player that we didn't expect necessarily to even be in the rotation until he blew up with that 40-point game in preseason. He's played 30 minutes a night. He's the 125th ranked player. He's averaging 15 and a half points per game. But to me, there's just been so many situations that have enabled him to push into these minutes. Jimmy Butler was hurt, Goran Dragic was hurt, Tyler Herro was hurt, Justice Winslow was hurt. All of these guys were hurt almost at adjacent times, not overlapping, giving Nunn these minutes. And when the team has been healthy, we've seen him push to 24 or 25 minutes a night, really not being much of a fantasy asset. Now, in terms of his on-off stuff, it's a little bit more positive than someone like Herro. I think he actually can peak maybe at even a higher level because Goran Dragic is no guarantee to be with this team next season, and that will help Nunn. So I think that Nunn can have a top 100 season, maybe in the next 2, but to me, he screams of a guy who's going to have a 2 to 3 year peak really soon, in his first 4 seasons probably, and then fall off pretty considerably. And the Heat will always be looking to improve things. They're always rumored in that sort of deals for Chris Paul and then for Bradley Beal, and if that happens, then his value goes down significantly. But as a guy who might be a starter for 2 or 3 years, and they go, shit, we really need to upgrade point guard, and then he goes back to a 20-minute-a-night role. So when we're looking at him for Dynasty, I think he can improve a little bit on what we've seen this season. Again, if no Dragic, that means he plays more of a consistent role. He still has quite a lot to do in terms of numbers. And he started off the season with really high steals, and they have fallen way away. Very low rebounds, low assists as a point guard. Doesn't get to the line really at all. Yeah, quite a limited overall fantasy profile for Kendrick Nunn. We know about what the Spur Duncan Robinson's been doing. He's the 3rd ranked player for the Heat in fantasy this season, 110th overall, literally on the back of one category. Threes, 3.7 triples a game. Like, that is what he does. He hits threes, and he hits them at an absolute shit ton volume. And if you need those numbers, that is what Duncan Robinson does. But again, it's why we don't always want to get caught up just on rankings alone, because of, it's skewed significantly by that one number. Rebounds, not much. Assists, non-existent. Steals, no. Blocks, no. Free throws, fantastic, but no attempts. 91% on less than one attempt a game. It really doesn't have too much of an impact there. Field goal percentage, pretty strong for a guy hitting them this much. 3-point percentage, great if you're in that sort of a league. But what else is happening here from Robinson, who's played 30 minutes and look, I think he's been really good. His on-off stuff is out of control. He's a plus 11.8 on-off. His PIPM is absolutely sky high at a plus 3.21. Really could stabilize in this role for another 3 or 4 years. But again, he is 24 years of age as well. So we're not talking about he's about to turn 26, Duncan Robinson. So he's got maybe 2 or 3 seasons left at these minutes. And not to say he's going to ever drop off and be a bad 3-point shooter, but can he go down to 26 minutes a night? I think there's a possibility there with Dunk. I think we look at him as just that 3-point specialist type of guy who's providing them in great volume, but I'm not really sure what else comes from Duncan Robinson. The next one's a tough one to really get a read on, because KZ Okpala, we really haven't seen him play at all for the Miami Heat. He has played 5 games this season, 25 minutes in total, and it's not enough to really gauge too much out of him. We can't look at his on-off stuff very much because, again, it's just really a small sample size. His PIPM is okay, but again, it's in so low minutes that it's hard to judge. I think he does have a pretty decent upside in a reserve role for deeper leagues, but will he ever develop into a starter? Who can become that guy who's a useful enough fantasy guy? If we look at his G League numbers, what's standing out there? 12 points per game in 29 minutes, 37% shooting. Like, that's a worry. 28% 3-point shooting. That's a worry. 64 from the line. Shit, that's a worry as well. But what's he doing? 1.3 steals, 1.1 blocks, 7 rebounds. Like, that's what it's about. Sort of like a Mo Harkless type of a player, which can have fantasy utility if he plays a 30-minute-a-night role. I'm just not ever sure he's going to get to that, but that's something to watch for those steals and blocks for Okpala. But the shooting is absolutely a real concern. Let's talk about the next guy on the list. Bam, 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 bam. Now, Bam Adebayo has been unbelievable this year. He was a pretty popular pick as a sleeper, a guy that I liked in that 40 to 55 type of range at the beginning of the season. He's exceeded my expectations to be the 31st ranked player this season. All-Star, 16 and 11, 1.2 steals, 1.3 blocks, 57%, 69 from the line. Giggity. That's probably where we can look at Bam and go, well, there's improvement that can come from the free throw line. What else can he do? What else can he improve on? Usage is the thing that's got to look at. And over the last 11 games that he played, he was at 25% usage. Now, some of that was without Jimmy Butler, but that is what he can do. Can he ever be a 20 and 12 guy? I don't think so, but 19 and 12, maybe, with good blocks, good steals, good field goal percentage, and getting that free throws up to 75%. I think he can not necessarily top out. Well, maybe top out is the right word. I don't think he can ever be a top 10 player, but I do think that he can be a top 20 player, and that just comes from free throw percentage, and it comes from usage overall. I think he's going to be an absolute rock-solid top 3 round player for the next 7 to 8 years. I think that's how we should. And that's why I didn't really want to talk to David about Bam, because we sort of see what he is. He's been unbelievable. There is some usage spike that can come. There's some free throw percentage spike that can come. Maybe he could get some extra assists, but he's already averaging 5 a game. Like, how much is he going to become Nikola Jokic and give you 7 a game? Like, I'm not sure he gets to that. But excellent stuff. The other thing we've got to see from him is 3-point shooting. Can he get to that? I think we're about 2 or 3 years away from that. And once he becomes a 75, 76% free throw guy, maybe he takes the Blake Griffin 3-point shooting route. I wouldn't be surprised about that. And that would push him into top 15 discussions. But Bam has a very, very strong and bright future. The next guy I'll look at here is Derrick Jones Jr., who has had multiple opportunities. He's still only 23, which is amazing. Younger than Nunn, younger than Robinson, still quite a young player, and that's why I included him on this list. But he just has so many offensive issues to me that it's hard to get overly excited about what Derrick Jones can do. The on-off stuff wasn't great for him this season. He was one of the negative players on the Heat. That shooting stuff from him is a real concern. But what he does do and what value he does provide is defensively. Now, I'm not putting a huge amount of value in what Derrick Jones can do. He's the 155th ranked player this season, mainly because of 51% shooting. And the last 2 years, his field goal percentage has been strong. He just can't shoot threes. But he's at 67% on his twos this year, which is an absolutely huge number from Jonesy. I'm just not sure that I view him ever as being a top 100 sort of a fantasy guy. He's still young, but the shooting, the lack of playmaking, the low volume three-pointers as well. He's a steals and blocks type of a guy who should have a solid enough role, but not someone I think you want to be relying upon as a starter. Chris Silva, a guy that many people wouldn't have really paid too much attention to heading into the season, but he's played 41 games as a guy that started the season as a two-way player. I think he's been pretty impressive during that time. Now, the on-off stuff doesn't necessarily agree with me there, but I think there's been times when he's been out on the court that he's looked better than Kelly Olynyk, than he's looked better than someone like Myers Leonard, but again, the advanced stuff doesn't really back that sort of thought process up. For Chris Silva, he's a big man. He's like a power forward center type of a guy who's averaging per 36 this season, 14 and 13 with 2 blocks. They are obviously really strong numbers. But where does he go? Now, there is some opening in that front court for the Heat with Olynyk and Leonard hardly guys that we're relying upon to be key parts of a rotation moving forward. And that's where can he ever fit next to Bam Adebayo and be that player? I think that he could maybe move into a Leonard role or an Olynyk role, that 20-minute-a-night role, and be a solid rebounds and blocks-ish type of guy with really strong field goal percentage. That has its value. But overall, I'm not sure he ever develops into any sort of level of a stud. The last guy I want to talk about is, again, a pretty low-down player on these lists, and that is Gabe Vincent, who signed during the year with the Heat as a G League guard. If we have a look at what he did in the G League, we'll get to that in a sec. But for the Heat, he's played just the 6 games. He's averaged 2 points on 21% shooting, so it's really hard to get a full grasp on what's happening there with Gabe. Again, his on-off stuff, it's all pretty low volume, but his G League stuff I think is worth having a look at. This is his second season in the G League. He's averaging 21 points a game. He's shooting 53% from 2 and 41% from 3 and 92% from the line. Not much else. 1.2 steals, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. So basically, he's like a worse-ish version of Tyler Herro, but a better shooting version at this point than Tyler Herro, at least from his G League numbers. But what else can he do? That's where we have the concerns here. What can he do defensively? What can he do passing-wise? What can he do volume-wise of getting to the free throw line? I have concerns, but I think that level of shooting and scoring that Vincent's shown, he can at least push into a maybe 11th man role, 10th man role, but nothing too much more than that would be my guess for Gabe Vincent. All right, let's flip it over now, talk about the Charlotte Hornets. I'm going to be joined later by one of the hosts of the Locked On Hornets podcast to talk about Jalen Mcdaniels. But let's start with Miles Bridges here, who's been a really big disappointment. He is still the 148th ranked player, and I say that like that's a good thing. It's not, because he was a guy that I was looking at to be the 70th, 80th best player this season and was drafting him in that area. We were right that he got a boost in minutes, not quite as many minutes as we hoped, but he just hasn't taken really any steps forward. His steal and block numbers are miserably low, and that was something that really helped him last season. His shooting numbers have been pathetic. His usage has not spiked anywhere near as much as expected. Now, to be fair, I didn't expect Devonte Graham to be coming in and taking all the shots that he has. But it's been really disappointing from Bridges to see that those shooting efficiency numbers drop way off. Now, he has been better from the free throw line, which I guess is something. But seeing steal and block numbers fall away as well is disappointing. Lower rebounding numbers also. But it's mainly that efficiency and a small bump in usage, but not probably as high as we would have hoped for. So what does this mean for his future? This was the opportunity for Miles Bridges to really establish himself. Now, he's only a second-year player. He's only, 22 years of age, just turned 22. So I'm not writing him off. He's probably got another 2-3 years left to really sort of establish himself. But can he ever be a top 50 player? And I've really got doubts about it. I much prefer McCall Bridges as a long-term prospect. I did as a Dynasty player, in their rookie years as well, and I'm still sticking with that. Bridges has been rough on the on-off stuff, negative 4.4 there as well, which is pretty bad. The worst or second worst on the team, strike that, third worst on the team on PIPM, the worst in terms of wins added. He has been really a disaster for this team when he needed to step up. Now, he probably was forced into a role that he obviously wasn't ready for, but just what he did at the end of last season gave you a bit of hope. He was shooting well, he was getting a steal, he was getting a block a game, he was a 1-1 player, and we thought, well, he's going to get this bump in usage. And he has got a bump, not big enough, and then everything else has fallen away. No playmaking. Like, what is he as a player? Like, I'm not really sure. I wouldn't ever be banking on top 50 years. I'm not sure that I even bank on any top 80 type years for Bridges. It'll be interesting to see if Charlotte does decide to go with him as a 4 and Paul Washington as a 5. That could at least open up a little bit more in terms of blocks and field goal percentage for Bridges, rather than playing him as a 3, but they need a 3 as well, so that's probably going to be his position, although I have liked it better when he plays at the 4 and when another player who we're going to talk about later plays at the 3. But overall, a really disappointing season from Bridges. As for Washington, very similar to Herro in that he played for Kentucky, and Kentucky players don't often get to showcase all they can do. Washington started out the season absolutely on fire, and everyone was falling all over themselves to grab him. And there was so much unsustainability in what he was doing that it was always going to fall off. And of course it has. He's the 142nd ranked player this season. He's only a couple of months younger than Bridges, despite playing one fewer season. 30 minutes a game, 12-5 with 2 assists, almost a steal, almost a block. And that's pretty disappointing to me, to be under a block a game for a guy like Washington. I think that he should be able to push to 1.2 blocks per game, but we're not at that level yet. And that first game of the season, like 27.7 triples, a 1-1, more than a 1-1, that was like obviously a huge game for him. And it has fallen off pretty considerably, really starting to pick back up just before the Corona hiatus, where he put up some big numbers. But his shooting numbers do change quite a bit there. They're quite variable. His PIPM is okay. I think defensively he's shown enough there. Is it enough for him to be considered like a center of the future? Like that, I'm not sure about. How confident are we in Washington being that guy who can hold down that center spot? I don't think he's necessarily big enough. I think he is still probably about 5 or 6 years away from peak production. I think his peak production can be probably pushing to top 60. I don't think he's Bam Adebayo, but Kentucky centers, they can do this sort of thing. So I think there is, if I'm looking at dynasty prospects on this team, I would have him above Bridges, even though he is a bit older as a prospect. He's 1 year younger, but again, it's his second season here, so he's about 6 months older overall from a timeline perspective. But overall, he's been up and down as we expect. But I think some promising signs there for Washington. Devonte Graham's an interesting one. Another guy that, again, at the start of the season, I said it marginally tongue-in-cheek when I was doing the Hornets preview, and I think I said it in a few other podcasts. I said I wouldn't be surprised if the best point guard on this team is Devonte Graham. I also followed up by saying the Hornets won't have the balls to start him over Terry Rozier, so I guess I was right on that. They just started him next to Terry Rozier. Graham has come out of nowhere, but his shooting is absolutely rough. 38% from the field this season, under 40% from 2 is really, really bad. Now, overall, he's still a massive positive. He's a plus 7.8 on his on-off. He starts alongside Rozier, who's a negative 4.8. He's trash. Bridges, negative 4.4. Cody Zeller, negative 3.1. Him carrying the load like that is huge. What does he do better? Can the shooting from Devonte Graham improve? That is the question that we have to ask. Like, what more can he do? Because the assists, fantastic. Like that, we love what we're getting from Devonte, averaging 7.5 assists per game. He is a better player than Terry Rozier, but he is not an elite point guard. A lot of people were talking about him at the start of the season as being, he should be in the mix for the All-Star game. I never fully believed in that. But I do think as the best fantasy player in this team, 54th ranked player, that's not unreasonable to expect multiple 3 to 4, he's 25 years now, I think 3 to 4 years of finishing between 35 and 60, I think is reasonable to expect from Graham. It's all about, can that shooting come up? The free throws are great, volume's okay, strong assists, steals have picked up over the last 20 games or so, good volumes of threes, good volume of scoring. But if this team ever gets better, which is probably a chance of that not happening anyway, he would likely be pushed. But he's not a starting point guard on a good team. I think that's the way I think we should look at him. But again, having faith in this Hornets team to become a good team in 4 or 5 years, I don't think we should have that sort of faith in them. So that does give Graham some value there. Malik Monk, just really disappointing. His entire NBA career, of course, currently serving an open-ended suspension for drugs that we don't know what it's about. He had a chance this season to start next to Terry Rozier or play 30 minutes next to Terry Rozier and lost those minutes to Devonte Graham. Now, I think he's been better than some people expect. The on-off stuff is pretty rough. He still has defensive concerns. He is a guy, though, that if things get rolling for him, the fantasy value is okay. But I'm all but sort of at this point, 3 years in, a suspension, multiple off-court issues that led to reduced playing time. I think I'm out on him ever being a good long-term fantasy guy. Over the last 13 games, though, he had picked it up. He was averaging 17 points, 1.6 threes, 46 and 85. Like some solid enough numbers there. He can handle the ball a bit, but with Rozier and Graham there, he's not going to get those opportunities. No steals. That's a real worry. Low rebounds. Not even really high volume of threes. I think for Malik Monk, the top 100 upside has sailed. I don't really believe in that for him long term. I think that there's a real chance, again, with another suspension, and if the Hornets look to go guard again in the draft, that he might even have only 1 or 2 real rotation seasons left in him. I'm really just down on what he has done throughout his career so far. I label these two guys together, the two Martins, Cody and Caleb. Remember, Cody is the better Martin, Caleb is the better shooter. So he's the more offensive guy to look at. Cody Martin has been basically a rotation player all season, one of the best rookies in terms of PIPM over the course of the entire year. He's a plus 0.09, and we very rarely get rookies to positives. He's a plus 6.2 in on-off, the second highest number on this team. Does that mean that he's a good fantasy player? Well, not really. He's the 301st ranked player overall this year. He's averaging 5 points, 2 assists, 0.8 steals, but that's in 19 minutes. So if he was to play 30 minutes a night, which I could very easily see him doing, going with a Cody Martin, Miles Bridges, Paul Washington 3-4-5 combination, is that a possibility for someone like Martin, who again is just a very good player who provides great value, but doesn't mean enough? His last 3 months, 27 minutes a night, 7 points, 5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1 steal. There's enough there to look at. The assists, the steals, there's some positives there. 46%, but why is he such a bad free throw shooter? He's a terrible three-point shooter, 23% overall, 65% from the line, low volume, minuscule usage. They're all the things that I worry about. He looks like a player who's going to be a really positive winning basketball player, like an Andre Iguodala late career type of guy who just isn't a good fantasy player. And that's him. Andre used to be an excellent fantasy player. The last 6 or 7 years, unbelievable on the court, doesn't really translate into fantasy stuff. And that's sort of how I see it for Cody. Now, his brother, completely different story. Amazingly, Caleb Martin has a higher fantasy rank than Cody this season on a per-game basis. He's only played 18 games and 18 minutes, but that's more minutes than Cody Martin on a per-game basis. But he's able to get here because of the scoring at 6.2 points per game, 81% from the line, 44% overall. He's hitting 54% of his threes. There is some upside there as a shooter. And in the G League, when I did a G League show over the All-Star break, he was a name that I mentioned. 21 points per game, 6 boards, 4 assists, 1.6 steals, 36% from 3 there, 54% on his 2s. Weirdly low on free throws, but some really strong G League shooting numbers from Caleb Martin. And with Dwayne Bacon, honestly, trash, and I'm not even going to bother talking about Dwayne Bacon here. He is not a long-term prospect. Malik Monk fizzling out. Terry Rozier on a bloated deal. Caleb Martin could be a backup shooting guard in the NBA. Could he be, like hearkening back to what we talked before, a worse version than Tyler Herro? Doesn't have the same chops as Herro, but great on-off stuff. really, really strong on-off stuff from Caleb Martin this season. Not as good as his brother, but strong. Good PIPM. I think he's shown out to be a pretty solid player that deeper dynasty leagues should not be ignoring. And I think we can look at Caleb Martin as a player, again, just with that shooting ability to at least stick around in the league as a rotation player and you have a little bit of value. And his defensive stuff's been okay this season, but that is still just a real deeper league sort of player. Let's talk about Billy Hernan Gomes, a player that we all love as that per-minute monster who can't get the minutes for, I was going to say numerous reasons, but it's not. It's one reason. He sucks on defense. He is so bad on the defensive end of the court that coaches, whether it was Jeff Hornacek with the Knicks, whether it was Steve Clifford with the Hornets, and now James Borrego, they just won't play him. And that is the concern with Hernan Gomes coming forward. 30 minutes a night, you lock him into the top 100. You have no concern. Per 36 this year, he's averaging 18 and 13. He's not blocking shots at a high level at all. He's starting to hit threes, but still really low volume. His free throws have gotten worse every single season. I think we need to just get that idea out of our head. Oh, he's a double-double machine. His per 36s are great. They're not that good. They're not as good as what we've been not led to believe, but I think when he came in as a member of the Knicks, his per 36s were great. 16 and 14, a block. He was like a top 100 per 36 player. He was his per 36 numbers: 73rd in his first season, 112th, 175th, and 208th this season, continually getting worse and worse and worse. And I think we need to just get that rookie season out of our heads and realize that he'll never get the minutes because he's not a good defensive player, and his other production has fallen off pretty considerably. And I'm not even convinced, with so many sort of middling average centers around, that Hernan Gomes is even going to remain in the league for the next 4 to 5 seasons. Now, the last player we're going to talk about is Jalen Mcdaniels, and I'm going to talk to Walker Mail of Locked On Hornets about Jalen. All right, now we bring in the host of the Locked On Hornets podcast. Walker Mail is here with me. We're going to talk a little bit about Jalen McDaniels, a player who we didn't really get to see much of at the beginning of the season, but entered the Hornets rotation as a regular member around the All-Star break and has been playing around that 20-minute a night mark since then. Walker, prior to that period of the 8th of February, McDaniels had played in 2 games for a total of 6 minutes, and then he was just thrust into this larger role. Do you think that that role was just purely because the Hornets were like, okay, we're in development mode, or had he earned it with his play in the G League? Look, what do we make of McDaniels being pushed into that role, and how has he succeeded in that new role?
Yeah, it absolutely was because the Hornets decided to go to youth. The Hornets at that point had bought out Marvin Williams. They had bought out MKG. Bismack Biyombo was really the only veteran getting any time. Nick Batum has sat the pine all season long. So they were pivoting to guys like Jalen McDaniels. Cody and Caleb Martin, both of the twins, had seen increase in their playing time. Even though Cody had been getting some playing time all year long, Caleb Martin was getting time. Even Joe Cheeley, a guy that probably didn't have any business getting time, was playing for the Hornets. So it absolutely was because of a pivot to youth. But Jalen McDaniels absolutely was succeeding while getting a lot more increased playing time. He was shooting the ball well, and I'm going to throw out the stats that might skew his overall stats from the first 2 games that he played. He had played the last 14 games of the season that the Hornets played, and that was that Dallas Mavericks game actually kind of a week after he turned 22. So when Jalen was thrust into the action again, he was shooting 39% from 3. They were all of the catch-and-shoot variety. They were all when he was wide open, but still at least knocking them down at a 39% clip. I thought he's been playing really well defensively. He's a good rebounder. He showcased that in college and in the G League. So, yes, he got playing time because they had kind of focused more of the playing time and giving it a lot to the guys that came up from the G League. But Jalen McDaniels absolutely had been playing really well until the season came to an unexpected end.
I'm glad you mentioned the shooting numbers because he did shoot 39% in the G League from 3 as well, so pretty strong there. Really good free throw numbers, 83% in the G League. He's at 82% in the NBA. All this stuff sort of marrying up. The one thing that hasn't translated from McDaniels is he had amazing defensive numbers. 2 steals a game, over a block per game in the G League. Hasn't really got anything like that going in the NBA so far. How much have you seen any of him in the G League and those defensive numbers? Is there a chance that he can become more impactful on that end?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if the defensive numbers, as far as when he made that jump to the NBA, are really indicative of how well he's played, especially for a young guy. I mean, there certainly have been some growing pains, but I like Jalen McDaniels' anticipation. I like his awareness. I thought he had a really good offensive but also defensive game against Toronto, which was in that 14-game mix that he played at the end of the season. I think he is a really good defender. I think this is a guy that can absolutely be a 3-and-D type guy that has the ability to also be a good rebounder in the NBA. But defensively, I absolutely think he can be certainly an above-average player on that end. And he showcased that, like you said, in the G League, having a block and 2 steals per game. There were a couple of games in the NBA that he had 2 steals. So to me, it's just all about him gaining strength. So he's 6'9", probably even 6'10". He's a tall perimeter player, and he only weighs 205 pounds. That actually is a little bit, I think, a 10, 15-pound increase from his days playing in college. So he needs to gain a lot of strength. There's no doubt about it. I do think he's got a pretty high ceiling defensively, certainly can be an above-average defender in the league.
On Basketball Reference, he's listed at 6'10", but only 192 pounds, which is obviously really, really skinny. What do you think his best position is? Is he a 4? Is he a 3? Or how does he fit in, say, with Paul Washington Jr., with Miles Bridges? Or where does those 3 guys fit in as a future front court? Could all 3 play together, a couple of years down the line as a starting 3, 4, 5? Like, how would you see that working?
If you look at what Mitch Kupchak has done in the draft, he has absolutely attacked versatility above all else. He did that with the first-round pick in Miles Bridges. He did that with the first-round pick in P.J. Washington. He also did that with the second-round picks in Cody Martin and Jalen McDaniels. I think what you're going to see Jalen play is the 3-4, and they're just going to put him at either one of those positions. I think whoever is on the floor, right? Maybe you would certainly have Cody Martin play more of that 2-3 role. They also like Cody even handling the one guard or the one spot every once in a while. So they have a lot of versatility all across the board. You even have seen Jalen McDaniels even have to guard the 5 at times. That's certainly not his position, but you certainly have seen defenses get him on the 5 every once in a while, and he has struggled defending that because of his lack of strength. But I do think that 3 and 4 mold, I think he would be an excellent stretch 4 at 6'10" and an excellent rebounder, like I said. So if you made me choose, I'd probably go 4. But I really like his ability at the 3, too. I think either one of those spots work well for Jalen.
It is going to be interesting to see if he can bring that offensive side of it. I am pretty confident with his defense and his rebounding, but his usage has been extremely low so far. Like about 13%. He's averaging just a couple of points a game, 6 points per game in those 20 minutes a night since he entered the rotation. So in order for him to become a really good fantasy player, we need to see some of that usage spike. He was a 21 usage guy in the G League, but that's still for NBA players and NBA rotational roster players. That's a pretty low number, so that is the concern there. But the shooting's been impressive. The free throw numbers are great. If he can translate those rebounding and defensive numbers over from the G League, there is a player there, and I think that he can be, maybe you disagree with me, Walker, I think he can be a starter in this league. Maybe it's only a short period of time. You wouldn't pencil him in as a 10-year plus starter, but I think he can have a couple of years where he can be relied upon as a starter level player.
I absolutely agree. I think right now, if you were to rank some of the guys that were unexpected that kind of rose this season, Devonte Graham certainly is above all, even if his shooting numbers took a really big decline in the after that Brooklyn Net 40-point game that he had. Devonte Graham certainly you would put up there. Certainly you like what P.J. Washington has given you. But if you were to compare him to the second rounders and the undrafted players that have gotten time, like his brother or like Caleb Martin, like his brother Cody Martin, I think that I would put Cody above Jalen, even if the shooting numbers are down, just because of his feel for the game and his defensive intensity. I think it's through the roof. I love what Cody Martin has given you, but I just think that speaks to the Hornets' developmental system that they have honed in a ton in the G League ever since James Borrego has become the head coach of this team. I think Jalen McDaniels is probably second. I really like his game. I think if he gains some strength, I think if he is able to create off the dribble, offense really comes from catch and shoot right now. As you see, he hasn't taken one 3-pointer this year off of the dribble. It's all been catch and shoot. They've all been open. So that's something to certainly look out for in the future if he can develop a little bit more offensively in his game. But I think he's got a tremendous awareness, a tremendous anticipation. I think he's a smart basketball player. That's something Borrego has mentioned, saying that he's extremely coachable. It's a sponge when talking to Jalen McDaniels, and he doesn't often make the same mistake twice. So I completely agree with you. I like that this is a guy that can possibly play a role for you in the future, just like Cody Martin can for this Hornets team. And looks like this team may have found a couple of steals in the second round.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would say you don't have to comment negatively on this, Walker. But I would say that those two guys are firmly ahead of a former second round pick in Dwayne Bacon. But Walker, thank you for coming on to the show and talking about McDaniels. Great, and if people want more in-depth stuff on the Hornets, they can go and check out Locked On Hornets. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, man. I always enjoy it. Thanks again.
Guys, that'll do it for today's show, talking about the Heat and the Hornets. Don't forget, subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube. Give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, tell your friends. Again, giving you guys hopefully something to do and something to watch and listen to during these enforced shutdowns. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.